When my father's hand struck my face, it wasn't just a slap. It was the moment my entire life split in two. The sound echoed through the ballroom, through my bones, through 38 years of trying to be his perfect daughter. He looked at me, calm and cold, and said, "You're no child of mine." The cameras caught it. The world watched. And as I stood there, cheeks burning, I finally understood. He wasn't just cutting me from his will. He was erasing me from existence. My name is Rachel Moore, and that night, I thought I'd lost everything. I didn't know I'd just found the first crack in a lie 35 years old. I can still feel the heat of those stage lights, so bright they erased faces and mercy alike. The ballroom glittered with gold and money, the kind of night built for photographs, not people. My father stood in the center of it all, tailored perfection in a gray Italian suit, smiling for the cameras, while I stood a safe distance behind him, the silent daughter in his empire's shadow. The applause rolled through the room like a wave until the MC said it, one careless sentence that split the air. He thanked me for uncovering the internal accounting discrepancies that had saved the company millions. The crowd froze. My father's smile didn't fade. It fractured. His hand moved faster than thought. The sharp crack of glass against skin silenced everything. "You're no daughter of mine," he hissed, voice low enough for the microphones to catch. "You embarrassed this family!" Flashes erupted like gunfire. Someone gasped. Another whispered, "Did he just—" I didn't cry. I pressed my palm to my cheek, feeling the sting and the chill of the silver bracelet cutting into my wrist. That night, the video spread like wildfire. Billionaire father slaps daughter on live TV. Strangers debated my worth in the comments, while the people I called family stayed quiet. My stepmother, Eleanor, texted 2 words: "Lay low." I sat in the dark of my kitchen, the city lights flickering through the window. My reflection stared back, lips split, eyes hollow. "You're free now," I whispered to the woman in the glass. But freedom shouldn't taste like blood. And I didn't know then. What felt like the end of everything was only the first crack in a secret that had been buried for 35 years. 3 knocks, sharp, measured, deliberate, cut through the quiet of my apartment at 7:05 Nah. They didn't sound like reporters, or neighbors, or anyone looking for gossip. When I opened the door, 3 people stood there in perfect suits, their expressions so composed they made my worn living room feel like a courtroom. The man in the middle extended a card. "Nathaniel Pierce, Lexon and Price Law Firm. We represent Mr. Michael Grant." I frowned. "I don't know anyone by that name." His voice was calm, almost gentle. He says, "He's your biological father." For a second, the room spun. I laughed, dry and nervous. "That's impossible." Nathaniel set a thick folder on my kitchen table. On the cover, faded letters read, "Portland Police Department, Missing Child Case, Amelia Grant, June 1987. Inside was an old photograph of a young couple holding a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. The baby wore a tiny silver bracelet shaped like a crescent moon, the same bracelet glinting on my wrist. "My father gave me this," I whispered. Nathaniel shook his head. "It wasn't his family's heirloom." He slid out a DNA report, 99.8% match, Michael Grant. My breath caught. "You're wrong. My father is Frederick Moore. I grew up in Seattle. Frederick and Eleanor Moore falsified your birth certificate," he interrupted softly. "The case was closed in 1988, but your DNA just reopened it." I flipped through the file. Burn reports, police notes, newspaper clippings. A red line under one name. Primary suspect. Female. Hospital nurse. Eleanor Davis. Eleanor Davis. My stepmother's maiden name. Nathaniel's voice broke through my silence. "Mr. Grant never stopped searching. He's waiting for you in Wyoming." I sat there for hours, staring at the file, my hands trembling. If the man who raised me wasn't my father, then who had I been all these years? 2 days later, I left Seattle behind. The rental car hummed across the open Wyoming plains, air thick with the scent of ash. Elk Ridge was barely a town, one cafe, one church, one forgotten police station leaning against the wind. A retired officer, Henry Lasker, studied me for a long moment before saying quietly, "Grant girl? We thought you died in that fire." He told me about the blaze in 1987, the Grant farm reduced to smoke, the mother missing, no child's body ever found. A strange woman had shown up at the local hospital days before, claiming to be a pediatric nurse. Henry pulled out an old photograph from a warped file drawer. Eleanor Davis, smiling at the camera, the same sharp eyes as my stepmother. "She changed her name and moved west," he said. "We could never prove a thing." I walked out shaking. The brick wall behind the station still carried black stains, the air still faintly smelling of melted plastic and secrets. When I returned to my motel that night, an envelope had been slipped under the door. Inside was a photocopy of a receipt from Agencia de Adopciones Privadas, Mexico, 1988. Paid by Frederick Moore and Eleanor Davis. The realization hit like a blade. He hadn't just cut me from his will. He'd bought me like property. Under the weak yellow lamp, I stared at the silver bracelet on my wrist, remembering the same hand that once struck my face. I had been carrying proof of their crime my entire life, without ever knowing it. I parked on the gravel and walked up to the porch, the smell of pine and wood smoke sharp in the cold air. He opened the door, tall, silver-haired, face carved by years of work. Michael Grant looked like someone who had been waiting with the weather. "You've got your mother's eyes," he said. "I knew you'd come home someday. Millie." The name landed like a bell. I told him I didn't know who I was anymore. He didn't flinch. The living room was full of faded photos and dusty wooden toys. A varnished cradle sat like a promise on the shelf. He told me he polished it every year, just in case. Then he said what I hadn't been ready to hear. The fire in '87 wasn't an accident. It was arson. After the blaze, Frederick Moore quietly bought the Grant land. More than that, the insurance payout went to Moore, not to my father. "He insured your life," Michael said, "and he collected when you burned." He handed me a photograph of my mother, June, smiling by a haystack. "They told me she died in that fire," I said, voice thin. He shook his head. "She vanished 3 days later. Someone took her away." An old neighbor swore he'd seen a woman carrying a baby onto a truck with Washington plates, the same state where Moore's company was registered. That night, lying in the wooden bed, the house creaked like a story waking up. I closed my eyes and knew I would go back to Seattle not for answers, but to make them listen. Rain washed the city when I returned. For the first time, I used my own skills against the family ledger, tracing transactions from 1988 to 1990 through buried archives and corrupted backups. A transfer caught my eye. $1.2 million to Agencia de Adopciones Privadas, Mexico, authorized by F. Hugh Moore and E. Davis. Eleanor Davis, my stepmother's old name, stared up from the printout. Hidden emails surfaced. Adjust birth date by 6 months. Keep documents sealed. They had manufactured my legal life. The apartment went black as I downloaded the files. A van idled outside in the wet. My phone buzzed. "Stop digging or we'll bury you too." I called Nathaniel. "You crossed a federal line," he said. "This isn't family anymore." Minutes after I sent the data, the files vanished, wiped from the servers within 12 minutes. Someone inside had privileges that could erase history. The next morning, an unmarked envelope slipped under my door, a grainy photo of Eleanor in a hospital room, cradling a newborn. Scrawled on the back, June 14th, 1987. The baby's tiny wrist bore a sliver of silver. I tucked the photo into my coat, feeling rain like a dare. If they'd burned the truth once, I would dig it out of the ashes myself. I walked into the storm. This time, I was hunting. I handed the financial files to Nathaniel Pierce. He studied them in silence, then said quietly, "Rachel, this isn't just fraud. It's kidnapping. Interstate. International. This is federal." Hours later, 2 FBI agents arrived, Rivera and Collins. They listened as I told them everything, from the public humiliation to the threats that followed. Rivera leaned forward. "We can protect you. Witness security. They stole my name once," I said. "I'm not hiding behind another one." Soon after, the FBI found the Mexican account still active, withdrawn yearly by Eleanor Moore. "That's your mother's name, isn't it?" Rivera asked. "No," I said. "That's the woman who took me from mine." I signed the cooperation papers. That night, my car was broken into and all my files were gone. A neighbor swore they'd seen a woman in a white coat outside at 2 a.m. Like a nurse's uniform? Eleanor was still watching. Then Nathaniel sent me a recording. Eleanor's trembling voice said, "If she keeps digging, he'll destroy her like he destroyed the mother." My pulse froze. The mother, my real mother, was alive. That night I dreamed of burning wood, of a woman running through flames with a child. When I woke, my phone buzzed. Denver, tomorrow. The Grand Regency Hall glittered with lies. I stepped inside in a black dress, staring up at the banner. A legacy of hope. I almost laughed. Frederick Moore took the stage, microphone in hand, Eleanor beside him. "Tonight, we celebrate integrity and family." I walked forward, heart hammering. "Then tell them, Father, whose child am I?" The crowd froze. Cameras turned. Frederick's smile cracked. "Rachel, you shouldn't be here." "Neither was I supposed to be in your house 38 years ago," I said. I lifted the photocopied contract, signed F. Moore and E. Davis. Eleanor went pale. Her glass shattered. The doors burst open. "Frederick and Eleanor Moore, you are under arrest for kidnapping and fraud." The crowd erupted. Frederick shouted, "I gave you everything. You took everything first." As agents cuffed Eleanor, she cried out, "Stop this! Your real mother. She's alive." Nathaniel appeared beside me. "Rachel, Mrs. Hill from your gallery. Her real name is June Grant." The woman who'd written me letters for years, my confidant, my friend, was my mother. And as the FBI led them away beneath the blinding lights, a legacy of hope glowed above the chaos, burning white like ash. I flew to Wyoming the next morning, the sky gray and endless, the air so thin it felt like breathing through glass. Snow floated across the road in thin ribbons, and the mountains shimmered silver in the distance. The cabin sat alone at the end of a narrow trail blanketed in white. The mailbox said, "June Hill." I already knew what I'd find inside. When the door opened, I forgot how to breathe. Her eyes were the same pale blue as mine, soft, trembling, alive with disbelief. Her hand rose, hesitating midair, then touched my cheek as if testing whether I was real. Tears welled in her eyes. She whispered that she had thought she'd forgotten my face. But here I was. I managed to ask if she was Mrs. Hill. She shook her head slowly, voice breaking. "No," she said. "June, your mother." The world stopped moving. We stood in silence until she led me inside, the warmth of the wood stove wrapping around us. On the table sat a small wooden box. She opened it, and inside lay a silver bracelet shaped like a crescent moon, the twin of mine. She told me she'd kept it for the day I found my way home. I removed my own and placed it beside hers. The two halves fit perfectly, clicking together with a faint metallic sigh. That tiny sound felt like a door opening in my chest. June told me everything in a voice that cracked and healed all at once. Frederick had wanted her to sign over custody, promising money and protection. When she refused, he warned her that the farm wasn't fireproof. Days later, it burned. I told her he'd once called it legacy insurance. She squeezed my hands, her skin paper thin but warm. "He stole you," she said softly. But he never made you his. The scent of pine filled the air. On the wall hung an old photo of the Grants, beside a small cradle polished to a shine. She smiled through tears and said my father had sanded it every year, just in case. For the first time in my life, I felt what it meant to be waited for, and loved without proof. 3 months later, the federal courthouse in downtown Seattle was overflowing. Reporters packed the corridors. Microphones pointed toward the heavy oak doors like weapons waiting for a confession. Inside, the air felt sterile, the lights cold, and the polished floor gleamed with an almost cruel perfection. Every click of a camera shutter echoed through the room, cutting into the silence that followed. I sat in the witness chair, my palms pressed together to keep them from trembling. The silver bracelet around my wrist glinted beneath the fluorescent light, a constant reminder of what had brought me here. Truth, not revenge. Frederick entered first. He still wore his power-like armor, a dark Italian suit, crisp tie, shoes that caught the light. Yet his eyes were hollow, stripped of their old fire. Eleanor followed close behind, her hair undone, her hands shaking as if each step forward cost her something she no longer had. They didn't look at me. Maybe they couldn't. The judge called my name. I stood, feeling every camera turn toward me. My voice was calm, steady in a way I didn't expect. My name is Amelia June Grant. For 38 years, I lived a lie. I thought love meant obedience, and success meant silence. But love built on lies is still a cage, no matter how polished the bars. Eleanor covered her mouth and began to sob. Frederick's lips pressed into a thin line. He said, voice low and cracking, that he'd given me a life I never would have had. I met his eyes. You didn't give me life, I said. You stole it. For a moment, no one breathed. The judge's gavel struck once, twice, like thunder through the courtroom. Frederick and Eleanor Moore, guilty on all counts, kidnapping, fraud, obstruction of justice. The words seemed to hang in the air longer than sound should. Years ago, he had humiliated me before the world. Now, under the same merciless lights, the world watched him fall. The slap that had marked the beginning of my ruin had become the echo of his own undoing. As officers moved in, Eleanor turned toward me, eyes wet and wild. She whispered that she had loved me, that I was her child too. I shook my head slightly, my voice barely above a breath. No, I said, I was your debt to truth. Frederick hesitated at the door, his shoulders sagging under the weight of what was left of him. He turned once, eyes glistening. I caught the shape of his mouth forming 2 simple words. I'm sorry, I didn't answer. Because forgiveness, I'd learned, wasn't about releasing someone else. It was about freeing yourself from the need to keep their apology. The gavel struck one last time, and in that hollow silence, I realized justice doesn't roar. It settles, quiet and absolute, like dust after a storm. 6 months later, I returned to Elk Ridge. The road was quiet, the sky pale with early dusk. In my hands, I carried a small urn, the ashes of my mother, June Grant, who had passed peacefully in her sleep just a week before. The same woman who had waited half her life for me now rested in my arms one final time. I walked across the open field where the old Grant farmhouse once stood. The soil still smelled faintly of pine and char, like memory refusing to fade. I knelt in the tall grass and opened the urn. The wind rose gently, lifting the ashes into the moonlight. They shimmered, turning silver before scattering across the land that had once burned for us both. When the wind stilled, I placed a small wooden frame on the fence post. Inside were 2 silver bracelets, one hers, one mine, joined at last. On the frame, I had carved a single word, reclaimed. One half of her, one half of me, no longer stolen, no longer apart. That night, I founded June's Promise Foundation, a quiet place for women robbed of motherhood and for children who grew up inside someone else's lie. It had no grand building, only a simple logo, two interlocking circles, like twin moons closing around truth. I still work as a forensic accountant, but every case feels different now. I don't chase guilt. I chase the restoration of what was taken. I seek to return truth, not vengeance. Before I left, I opened my journal and wrote, "He cut me from his will, but he never owned me. I wasn't born from their wealth. I was reborn from her truth." The wind brushed through my hair, carrying the faint ring of a wind chime. Moonlight spilled across the old wooden cradle, empty for 35 years. Now it held only two silver bracelets glowing softly, whispering through the quiet night. You were never lost, only waiting to be found.